Hello. I am the PhD ninja. Can you hear me? I am a new kind of ninja because this is a very hippie top, really. And you don't see too many ninjas wearing glasses. These fingers will type you. Big shit out. Big. Hello. There you are. Big shout out to my colleague Tess Garrity from the University of Adelaide, who got her notification yesterday that she has passed her PhD submission. Yay! Well done, Tess. Awesome. It's another doctor, she was in anthropology. She was more of the development studies, or she is more of the development studies, I should say, not was. I say was because she was in my office and she will now be leaving us. Room G22. Legendary status. Although I hadn't been there for yonks. Prefer to work from home, really, I think. I don't know. Whatever. Just lazy. Too lazy to go in. Hey, welcome to episode 7. Episode 7 of the Call of the Void. Call of the Void is... What is the Call of the Void? Is a fortnightly vlogcast. So this is kind of a video blog of me, Michael Allen, really bad timing for that to happen. This is like an online blog of me, Michael Allen. I'm a PhD student, candidate at the University of Adelaide, working in the Department of Anthropology, and I'm studying, I'm doing a research degree on online theatre, developing online theatre, live performance online, researching the current practices of online theatre around the world, who's doing what, how they're doing it, yada yada. Go away, all these things coming up my computer that I don't want to see. So yes, so this is my online vlog where every 2 weeks I come online and I chat with you, the audience, and I speak to me in my own private universe about the themes and ideas and things that I'm working through as I'm writing. So I'm writing my thesis at the moment. I'm in the writing stages. I'm in the last few months, got about 9-10 months to go, I think. And I am, as I'm writing, I'm reading and thinking, and then I decide, you know what, this is a new form of thing, so I'm going to come online, I'm going to sort of diarise it and blog it, and anyone out there who's interested in learning about what and how theatre makers can make the transition into an online world, talk with me about it, learn about it. Transitioning live performance online and all that entails. So this week I have a treat for you. Well, before we get started, this week I have a treat for you. I'm going to read you, I'm about to submit for review to my supervisors, my first chapter 1 out of 4. A little bit behind my own self-imposed deadlines, but that's the nature of things anyway. So part of the process of writing is I always teach this, and I've done this, is to read aloud and to read to someone else what you have written. When you read things aloud, all the syntax and the errors and sentence structures and stuff really sort of stand out. You can hear yourself say it. No, that doesn't make sense. And when you read it to someone else, if they can come back and say, yeah, I get that, or you lost me a bit here, or whatever, it's really good feedback to sort of clarify. So before I make that submission, I'm going to do that process of reading it out. Shouldn't take long. It's only 10,000 words, won't take long. But before I do that, I want to show you this. Okay, I want to show you a few things first. If you want to be a part of helping to develop this new genre of theatre, which I have called web theatre, then you can do that by going to this place, which is my Patreon page. And for $2 a month, really cheap. Look, this is community-based thing. I don't need to go into all of this sort of stuff. You can check it out for yourself. This is my Patreon page. It's only just started. I'm developing it. I am developing it in harmony with my Vimeo channel, which I would like to, which is our first goal that we are trying to achieve. Where is that? So we have half a dozen patrons already. Thank you very much. So I'm doing this vlogcast, but I'm also developing a new play. I'm going to do more content on here. I've actually started to think like an adult and a grown-up and started to make some longer term plans. The idea being that over the next 10 months, while you join me as I finish my thesis, by the end of that, we will launch into the world's first online theatre company, which will be exciting, won't it? Part of that process is joining me in every step of the way. So you can watch me type my thesis if you're interested in that. If you've never seen anyone actually sit and write a thesis before, come and join me. I'm on here nearly every day for a little while, and I'm typing. You can talk to me while I'm typing if you like. I'm always up for some procrastination. Best place to talk to me is at the Twitter hashtag webtheatre. If you go there, talk to me on that hashtag webtheatre. Always up for procrastination. If you've got any questions, you can always ask me. So I'm doing that at the moment, but yes, I'm also developing this new online theatre company, something that's never been done before. It's always exciting to do something that's never been done before. It's also scary as fuck. Let's see. Window. And I want to put in forgot what I was going to do already. Anyway, so yes, please join me there at that site. If you want to learn more about the company, you can go to here, which is my web page. Yada. So, like I said, here is where we discuss the nature of. I've got my. There it is. One thing I forgot to set up this morning was the Twitter feed into the broadcast. Give me 2 seconds and I'll do that. so okay, that should be working now. Okay, so let's get stuck into it. Let me read you a little bedtime story. Read along if you like. I'm going to read this aloud. On my YouTube channel. I'll say something. michaelallenproductions.com. Go and check it out. Here, I'll show you. This is the Lunch with Jenna page. That's me looking much more interesting. Yep, you can go watch all the episodes there. Okay. 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 Let's get back to it. This exegesis is intended to support the creative analysis of 3 live stream plays, which were produced as part of fieldwork for this PhD in online performance. So what is this research about? At the guts of it, what was I trying to discover? It is important, if an important, if not broad and blunt approach, when I launched into the field in November 2017. Started with a fairly basic premise. I wanted to know if it was possible to make a live online theatrical experience. Can you make a narrative drama out of a web-based experience? Can you create something that has the recognisable basic elements of a suspended theatrical reality, which was unique to the forum of Web 2 sociality? What does that even mean, and what might it look like? Theatre performances, plays, have been captured and broadcast since the early days of film and later television. The phenomenon of recording plays performed in theatres or restaging them for film interpretations is not new. It is a capture and release model where the experience of the live performance is captured on film and then broadcast or released to an audience separated by time and space. These recordings emulate traditional and conventional forms of literature, staging, performance styles, and significantly, audience-actor relationships. They do this primarily because they follow the conventional mise-en-scène or performance framed by orthodox staging. You're on that camera at the moment. Now, much has been written about the nature of performance, both as an artistic form and its social functioning. Turner, Bateson, Goffman and Schechner, for example, have written about the relationships of power, authenticity and ritual as concepts that transcend any one performance and show how these socio-cultural acts are carved out of everyday social relationships and then remediated to perform functions of ritual, rites of passage and entertainment. In fact, the power and potential of these conventional theatrical practices in space create more than a suspension of disbelief, but can be capable of redefining social relationships entirely by the mechanism they use to suspend everyday... to suspend them. To suspend them. Don't have to say it so many times. See, that's the value. That's the value of reading something out loud to yourself. You get to hear it and go, no, that's clunky. That's well, you're on that camera now. That's clunky. I need to rework that. Anyway, as I've written about in my previous thesis, Chase the Feeling, this arrangement of people in space following conventional staging practices, orthodox. Let's get some more orthodox in there. Docs. Staging practices can create a world where disability can be vanished completely. Specifically, though, this research was conducted to... I'm not going to read out the references. Which one are you on? I'm not going to read out the references. Specifically, though, this research was conducted to explore how live stream technology and Web 2 social media platforms may change these taken for granted covenants of live performance in relation to narrative drama. The most significant difference between the online performance and the conventional live performance is the mediation of the experience via digital technologies designed specifically to interface with the internet. Designed specifically for interaction. Conventional designed specifically for interaction. And it is because of this unique interface the most significant difference between the online performance and the conventional live performance is the mediation and IRL performance and IRL in real life performance is the mediation via digital technologies specifically designed for interaction technology interface designed specifically for interaction and communication. And it is because of this unique interface that established modes of performance analysis are not practical. This is not an abstract theoretical position, as I discovered over the course of fieldwork conducted over 14 months with a small ensemble of actors and performers. Well, an abstract theoretical position, as I discovered over the course of fieldwork conducted over 14 months with a small ensemble of actors, theatre makers, let's say theatre makers, with theatre training and performance careers, with established careers. With formal training and professional. Enjoying it so far? Having fun? It's not quite a bedtime story, but through trial and error, I came to the understanding that my orthodox training and method, these orthodox training and method was not particularly useful in this new genre. And if my training and experience was not useful, then it occurred to me that my training was embedded within these conventions, these rules of how to perform and present drama in a real-life environment where location, time and space are simultaneously connected and guided by rules to govern them. I soon realised that in the live stream context, that continuing to create using these conventions would not work. Backtinian theory gets better. Backtinian theory better explains how the relationship between performers, audience and the mediums they use online can be considered in this new genre. Bakken had a reputation for being a theatrephobe, and most notably because the live aspects and interconnected elements of multiple individuals experiencing the same thing at the same time was counterintuitive, or at least too hard for him to dissect, to the hierarchy of literary authority when considering his significant terms in heteroglossia or dialogics. That is the reason you read things out loud, because that is a hell of a sentence. Let's go back and have a look, shall we? Bakken had a reputation for being a theatrephobe, most notably because the live aspects and interconnected elements of performance and interconnected elements of multiple experience the same thing at the same time was counterintuitive his prescriptive definitions the hierarchy of literary authority when considering his prescriptive definitions of heteroglossia or dialogics. These seem to work more neatly within a system that can trace a lineage from author to reader. However, a theatrical experience where the objective of the play is to encourage live imagination work, it seemed to become too problematic for him to maintain exactly who was saying what for whichever effect. Social and cultural languages, the view of the author, the political climate, the social class systems, the view of the director or the designer or the actor or the audience, these are all framed within their own silos of social makeup. Each has a direct and ordered influence on the production and consumption of a live performance, and yet none of them have a unified or universal effect on any of the individuals that inhabit any or multiples of these spheres. So Bakken analysis becomes too complex, which is why I said... it's going to be fun. I'll wait and see what they say. But Bakken analysis becomes too complex, which is why I suspect he seemed to relegate theatre performance to that of carnival because of its visual, spatial, improvisatory, performative qualities. But Bakken's concepts can apply to theoretical performance theory, and although common amongst literature analysis, it is rare to find his theories applied to live theatre. But although, hang on, let me read that again. But Backen's concepts can apply to theatrical performance theory. And although common amongst literature analysis, it is rare to find his theories applied to live theatre. But I just said that. Despite some use of Backen's concepts to performance theory, and although common amongst literature analysis, it is rare to find his theories applied to live theatre. What makes his ideas is the relationship of time and space, and more specifically location, play and artistic platform, as three paradigmatic identities which determine the fundamental channels of communication through which any theoretical performance reaches its audience. Armand is using the stratification of groups of people responsible for the event of a play in socio-cultural context when defining terms such as location, a literal physical environment, but also play, which is constructed in relation to its socio-historical content. Man, I'm struggling to understand this. This is a version of how Backen is conventionally understood within literary texts of differentiated speech. It is applying this feature which is important when considering the construction of a play or performance, particularly online, rather than using the literary implications of heteroglossia or dialogism onto the words written and ultimately uttered by the performance. I look to the layers of language used by the competing and complementary modes of production that inform the performance in the first instance. Rather than using literary structure, use to create the words, written and spoken. I look to the layers of language used by competing and complementary production that inform in the first instance. Hello, I'm on. Yeah, I'm on. You alright? What's that? Candy cane. Oh God, candy cane for breakfast. Kids are on school holidays. Okay, let's read that back again. Rather than using the literary use of heteroglossia or dialogism to create the words written and spoken, I look to the layers of language used by the competing and complementary modes of production that inform the performance in the first instance: stage direction, set construction, direction, production design, performance genre, and so on. Heteroglossia may generally be be referred to as the layered hierarchy of social languages, such as professions, politics, clergy, and so on. Such as professions. This may be why Batkin himself was averse to applying his theories to theatre and performance, because the great historical destinies of genres are overshadowed by the petty vicissitudes of stylistic modifications, which in their turn are linked with individual artists and artistic movements. Which seems to be a polite way of saying that any structural order to language is corrupted by personal ego, fame, or as we might understand it today, celebrity. However, heteroglossia is also intimately linked to dialogism, which describes the way languages interact. Leaving aside for a moment the impact on competing artistic movements, this is a useful concept when thinking about online or web-based interactions. For example, when Vice comments that each utterance, whether it takes the form of a conversation in the street or a novel, consists of the unique orchestration of worn words, this can be used as an interpretation of web-based interactions, from the coding of software to the use of emojis and GIFs in conversations, in a way that mixes diverse languages in a hierarchical way to communicate meaning. For example, let's get rid of that one there. When Vice comments can also be used. Applied to interpretation of web-based interactions. The coding of software to the use of emojis or GIFs. In a way that mixes diverse languages in a hierarchical order to communicate meaning. For example, most people are probably familiar with where am I? Oh, fuck's sake, fuck off. For example, most people are probably familiar with the phrase LOL, the term LOL to mean laugh out loud, and when correlating emoji or icons such as the applause, clapping, such as clapping hands, to symbolise applause, this gives the comment added impact. That made me laugh and I applaud you for it. There is some universalism of emoji language, but across different social media platforms there are unique and site-specific uses or interpretations determined by that platform and those users. On the live streaming website called Twitch, for example, there are a multitude of emoji icons, that only appear on that particular platform, and although the meanings may be relative to the environment of that activity, there is a particular social context for them which has to be learned as a language of chat icons specific to that platform and that group chat and the group chats they are used in. These examples do not necessarily reflect the coding language that is used to create and host a website or the functions that it performs. In most basic form, computer programming code is still predicated on the relationship of ones and zeros. In its most basic form, which give digital its heritage, but coding based on this basic premise has extrapolated into complex algorithms developed in concert with ever-improving circuitry and the like. These in turn have developed into applications and everyday software such as Microsoft Word, which I am using to type this thesis, and again even further into the world of social networking, such that I am investigating. There is a structured or hierarchical order to complex language coding and interface that reads somewhat like the book of Genesis in the terms of who begets whom. Code begat function, begat programming, begat software, begat applications, begat communication. And yet despite this seemingly complex yet rudimentary stratification of language into genre, register, sociolect, dialect and mutual interanimation of these forms, as cited by Allen by Weiss, there remains slippage. There remains slippage where meaning derived is not universal. Instead, the human ability to socialize meaning in context relies on this ability for slippage. The essence of creating dramatic narrative is generated from the slippage of meanings between the layers of hierarchical language that overlap each other. In this sense, the analogy of Batkin's heteroglossia can be invoked to conceptualize layers of coded programming language that each inform the present experience. One person's experience of Instagram, for example, is predicated on the way code has been programmed and the device with which they access it, but also the way they interact with others while using the app and the real-life context of when and how they go online to use it. A person, an individual will experience Instagram. You experience Instagram, for example. Your experience of Instagram, for example, is predicated on the way code has been programmed and the device you use to access it. The device you use to access it. But also the way they interact with others. The way you interact with others in the real life. In the real life context of when and how you get online to use it. This stratification of language and context exemplifies a fundamental principle of Batkin. There is an inevitable context selections, estimations of importance, and the invocation of social rules signalled by contextual cues and the preparation, at least in inner speech, of a response. Preparation of a response. When you're typing to someone, let's say you're flirting or you're trying to flirt. You're trying to hook up on Insta. You use language that you predict will have a response to the other person, and you use emojis or GIFs or Bitmojis now too, and you'll use those things to kind of add layers of meaning or innuendo or whatever. Those are the things you use, right? So what I'm getting at is that you've got computer code creates an application. That application creates things like emojis and things that you can use, but then it's your cultural language, the way that you use those emojis, which are culturally specific. Like, I learned the other day that, for example, is not, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, it means I want to pinch your nipples. Yeah? I mean, how do you know that? Well, How did I know that? Don't ask. Haha. This stratification, there is inevitable context. There is an intricate web of significance, to borrow a phrase, that is echoed in heteroglossy, the dialogic interaction which can be observed in life literature and by extension the life of the literature online. Beyond the building blocks of a social media platform, an SMP itself, there are also many layers of social or cultural context which add further layers to an online performance. A good place to start is the separation of public space and the public space, according to Hannay. According to Hannay, the public space can be thought of as simply something being outside of the home. How are we to think about this in terms of an SMP user? Physically, I may be in my home, operating an avatar of myself on a SMP from the comfort of my bedroom. I am in private, and yet I am out in the world, or the public spaces of SMPs. I can understand the difference between the public and private if I comment on a post or direct a message someone on Instagram, for example. And so I'm able to make a mental shift between a public space and a quasi-private space. Regardless of this layered context of space that I occupy online, it is still subject to an overall political formation defined as a host of ephemeral sensual factors which bring states of consciousness and the body together. And these layers of privacy on top of public, on top of private again and again, replicate real-world navigation online as described by Dennis Carter in her ethnography of the online community of Cybercity. Within this mighty maze of public-private spaces lies the denominator of authenticity, which is seen as crucial cultural capital. Somehow creating an authentic representation of yourself as an essence which transcends this matrix of language and meaning. There has been much written about how people communicate authenticity, which seems to be determined by the specific features of the community they are engaged in, and therefore showing how social communities validate authenticity. Each of these analyses, despite investigating specific cultural acts, confirm that authenticity is based on their own point of view and opinion, allowing the follower to gain insight into the influencer entrepreneur's feelings, thoughts and surroundings. In this matrix of SMPs, social group interests and commercialisation, it appears that success is marked by genuine encounters or authenticity that is measured by unspoken group moderation. Sylvester notes that this environment echoes Goffman's face work and others who have identified that this new online environment has a more complex interaction between fictive acts and fictive states, beyond the more conventional binary analogy of front stage and backstage. As she says, technology has created ways to transfer a role from reader to author, where we increasingly live our lives across a range of media. And there is a multitude of concepts surrounding this phenomenon, including the idea of micro-celebrity, which seeks to unpack the tangle of self-projection and authenticity for commercial gains across a range of engagement. Despite all of the technology and opportunity for self-crafted identities liberated from reality, there is still a reality, reality, there is still a significant level of social normalising of behaviour, and this is rooted in those invisible cultural and social rules of appropriate conduct. Group moderation is the earliest form of content mediation in online forums, and by all accounts will continue to be at both a social and commercial level. Yet this content management has developed into a global industry that aims to mediate the slippages and uses of SMPs that are continually being reconfigured by users. Moderation service is evidence of how humans are still at the centre of mediating a level of appropriate behaviour. Adapting to the constant and rapid evolution of social engagement, there are even more challenges emerging with the introduction of deepfake technology and government oversight of political advertising and news. This creates a significant feature of narrative discourse because the constant battle between authenticity and the human creative ingenuity to transform or manipulate online interactions is exponentially more complicated than Batkin's literary heteroglossia, and one reason he seems to have almost abandoned the field of performative drama from his analysis and bracketed it under carnival. Carnival seems to be a catch-all for social and artistic performances with fluid lineage of authority and one that is subject to the ebbs and flows of the crowd. The carnivalesque may be detected in textual images, plot or language itself, as carnival is a spectacle but without a stage in which the participant is both actor and spectator. Its textualisation is not a straightforward matter because the change of form at once introduces the equivalence of stage, a sharp distinction between the actor, character and narrator and spectator reader. Carnival's absence of footlights both encourages and prohibits linking it to drama. Consider then that this was written in 1997 during the emergent stages of web-based sociality, before Facebook and in the heady days of the dot-com. Oh, don't even need that. Before Facebook. Boom. It reads like a rudimentary definition of current online social practices, absent of the complexity of layered languages that facilitate them. And it is this conflagration of signs, platforms, symbols and technologies where I too became lost in the maze of order and protocol, which is at the heart of conventional theatre performance productions. Batkin's own words can help to understand where this slippage of hierarchy of literature language fails to fully explain the slippages which occur. The novel as a whole is a phenomenon multiform in style and variform in speech and voice. In it, the investigator is confronted with several heterogeneous stylistic unities, often located on different linguistic levels and subject to different stylistic controls. We list below the basic types of compositional stylistic unities into which the novelistic whole usually breaks down. There's the direct, authorial, literary, artistic narration in all its diverse variants, stylisation of the various forms of oral everyday narration, stylisation of various forms of semi-literary written everyday narration, the letter, the diary, various forms of literary but extra or artistic authorial speech, moral, philosophical, stylistic, individualised speech of characters. In many respects, these features can be identified in both social media languages and performers' outcomes when looked at as clinical interpretation of literary order. For example, a simple overlay of structures may look something like these points. No, you didn't catch that because I wasn't talking to you, Siri. Points may look something like this. Social media platforms, programming code, application experience, social media platforms themselves such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and so on. Style of communication via emojis, hashtags or character limits such as Twitter, which are preferred frame per platform. This can be observed in the interest-specific groups one may become a part of, the individual's characteristic style or personality when posting. Theatre performances, a script, a narrative performance, a story penned by the author with character arcs, stage directions and instruction for the staging of the production. The poetics, the strict cadence structures of the particular playwright author such as Shakespeare, Brecht or Printer. The staging of a production that may invoke or challenge in a meta-theatrical way staging conventions. The influence of director, designer, production team. Generally he will frame the production within local context. The particular actor playing the role and speaking the character's words. Casting of actors in these roles is specifically determined by the qualities that actor brings to the role and its interpretation, thereby making the role theirs. However, a hint to why these points are problematic for theatre and for SMPs can be found when Holmquist explains almost as a side note in the glossary that the variable voice complicates the speaker-to-listener code of the written word in a novel. Voice. This is the speaking personality, the speaking consciousness. A voice always has or will desire behind it its own timbre and overtones. For example, a shifting trope from the plane of poetry to the plane of prose. A poetic trope, while meaning more than one thing, is always only single-voiced. Prose tropes, by contrast, always contain more than one voice and are therefore dialogized. When considering the multitude of voices that have agency in a live performance or social media platform environment, it is clear to see why Batkin struggled with the complexity of this relatively neat analysis within the confines of a printed symbol on a page, with an almost direct relationship between the author who penned it and the reader in a solitary state of consuming it. The word of the playwright and the code of the programmer is not a direct line of sight to its audience. It is instead mediated through filters of interpretation, each filter assessing and applying its own lens or interpretation before it passes through to the next contact point, The above comparisons between Batkins and the SMPs or theatre performance would be well influenced by many more layers or filters than the 5 mentioned. It is worth noting that Batkins seems to be trying to analyse in a linear, two-dimensional and causal direction, which is completely fair enough when considering the printed word on a recourse for the reader to filter back any response which will in any way shape the words written. However, in live drama, there is a relationship with the audience that feeds back immediately to the authors of the performance. The authors, in this sense, being the every stage of interpretation from playwright to actor, although the actors are the immediate interface between them. It would be tempting here to employ the definition of dialogism to understand the unique features of return communication from an audience in this context. An actor performs a sight gag and the audience laughs in response, for example. However, that does not really help either, for even though the dialogism can be expressed as constant interaction between meanings, all of which have potential for conditioning others, this is still framed within a very specific hierarchy of who is allowed to speak in a performance. The audience must remain silent and receive the experience presented by the actor apart from responding to cues such as applauding during a curtain call. There are incalculable variants of class, location, privilege, accessibility if you are deaf, blind, autistic and so on. And accessibility. If you are deaf, blind, autistic and so on. Any performance is couched within these greater social contexts and cannot be separated from them when considering the makeup of that relationship between actor and audience, the relationship that seems to create unrest in a neat Baktian analysis. This is a counterintuitive problem when considering that dialogism is necessarily the way in which we construct meaning, because it is through negotiated meaning between speakers that common meaning of any artifact or thing becomes real. As can be seen above, there is an order to the flow of information and subsequent interpretation. In Batkins' literary example, which does not neatly transcribe into live as can be seen above, there is an order to the flow of information and subsequent interpretation. There is a I want to say ish. I shouldn't really say ish in an academic paper, should I? There is an order ish. There is an order to the flow of information and returned meaning. And just get rid of subsequent and interpretation, which does not neatly transcribe in a live drama. For example, when an actor is being in the moment, they may amend or refine any of the relationships of the literary order and overrule the hierarchy above it, including design, casting, concepts and rehearsals. An actor in the midst of a heightened and emotionally charged performance may change the inflection of a line or paraphrase if they dry, which would be if they dry. Forget a line. This minor disruption may indeed cause a contextual reverberation in the scene, which in turn becomes interpreted differently in the audience than was anticipated or designed by the director. Dropping, forgetting a line, or paraphrasing anything from Shakespeare, for example, would immediately cause a ripple within an audience, with his words so familiar and in some cases famous. Likewise, when an audience responds in a way that was not anticipated by the performers, a vocal outcry, walking out, or some other disruption, see Figure 1, this response in turn can influence the actor in unanticipated ways and internally knock them off their centre so as to give a different performance. And because of the interconnectedness and ecosystem of the performance event, this can have ever spiralling effects, which may mean the final experience is by far a different thing than what the author originally intended. The effects and results of these unintended disruptions can go on to make benchmark social events around which broader debates can arise. A Classic FM online article posted in September 2019 details the clear point of disruption and the ensuing cultural generation class wars of conventional theatre, which are at the heart of this point. Claims of disrespect and disbelief at the actions of the perpetrator's actions, transgressing sacred boundaries of the live performance, boundaries that harbour the visceral and abstract erratic experience as feel and might describe it. These invisible boundaries are consistent across generations and genres, which indicates that it is a universal feature of orthodox live performance events. Back in June, pop sensation Billie Eilish used her pyramid stage spot to call out how people use their smartphones at gigs while suggesting they live in the moment rather than look through their phone screens. And yet, despite the admonishment of established theatre and performance protocols, as the socially constructed vessel within which these moments take place, the author observed the seemingly misunderstood phenomena of these perpetrators, and indeed maybe even a more representative appreciation of the same events because of the new social norms of online interactions. Last year, though, it was revealed that 1 in 5 teenagers claimed they would actually engage more with classical music if they could use their phones to capture moments and share them on social media during concerts. Are you liking the story? Are you liking the story? This article and the story behind it articulate perfectly the knot of social behaviour and meaning now being challenged and disrupted by web-based sociality. It does so by showing how the heteroglossia, the hegemony of power and the criteria for dialogism are finely balanced in live performance, and any disruption can cause chaos. It is this chaos that Batkin seems to have struggled with, and initially at least coined the term carnival as a kind of catch-all for these live stories. As described by Christeva in Vice, carnival is a spectacle without a stage in which the participant is both the actor and the spectator. The two-dimensional nature of his analysis did not allow for the more three-dimensional influences all simultaneously existing, affecting experience, if not process. At this junction, Batkin's analysis, where hegemony and order dissolve somewhat into an experience, cannot simply be used to dissect what is happening in cultural performance or social media. Considering the above article as an example, it is clear how the formalised performance degenerated into social disruption and the spectacle of someone being escorted from the venue. Keep in mind that this was not an act of violence, terrorism or other social unrest. It was an audience member or similar social unrest. It was an audience member at a classical musical recital using their phone. It is apparent that the social order of the event was challenged and disrupted. As such, the codified and ordered performance experience communicate down the heteroglossian order has collapsed, and a carnival of social disruption has occurred, making the event the experience, not the artistically communicated narrative of the music. And in the disassembled remains of this music recital, one could turn to Turner and invoke the ideas of disruption and reintegration. One could use Bateson, Goffman, Van Gennep and so on to explore the power dynamics, social order and performance masks being unmasked in this story. Alternatively, there is room for semiotic analysis of cultural signs and symbols, something that all of these theorists employ somehow into their analysis, and bricolage is not an uncommon term amongst anthropology. But I would like to utilise another often overlooked feature of conventional live performance, which is the absence from online performance, which is conventional IRL performance, which is absent from online performance. And that is the gateway to understanding a new conceptual dimension of the live show. At the heart of this way of thinking lies debates that have existed in anthropology for many years, specifically the debate Turner had in the 60s with other peers about authority and experience. Victor Turner was also predominantly concerned with the liminal and the liminoid, the latter being a general secular concept relating to sources for human freedom and liberation. As such, there was a conceptual tension between Turner and the avant-garde theatre makers of the same era, including Grotowski and the framed theatre anthropologist Richard Schechner, who aimed to abolish the distance between actors and audience. They offered spectator-participant avenues of self-development and conceptual liberation from societal rigours and the possibility of becoming dedicated shamans. For these theatre makers who were deeply engaged in the social theory of culture and anthropology, there existed a desire to give the liminal experience to the audience such that they fundamentally rid themselves of the corporeal, as Castaneda might put it, and therefore have a total and transformative experience. However, this has been problematic for Turner-led approach, where he values the liminoid experience over the liminal one, because he sees it as more secular and liberating for the audience member, who has some agency remaining about their engagement. Also, from a practical perspective, as a theatre maker, this is not an experience that can be achieved simply by virtue of the fact that the creative ensemble must be the architects of that journey, and are the sole arbiters of its success or failure for the audience. In this sense, then, the lateral agency of all participants in such a performance is doomed to fail, as it is always in response to directorial or authoritarian decisions made by others. It would appear that the space is ripe for such a transformative experience, free from corporeal experience, and like smoke. So what component is not being accounted for? I argue that there is one significant feature which has been overlooked or taken for granted, the concept of the fourth wall. What is the fourth wall? To put simply, I talked about this one a while ago. Put simply, the fourth wall is a theatre convention whereby there is an imaginary wall through which an audience observes the action of the characters on stage voyeuristically. It is an accepted concept whereby the actors are aware of the audience, but the characters they are portraying are not. This is also whilst the audience is aware that there are actors performing functions on a stage, but suspend their disbelief to afford the characters a real life. It is a communal magic trick, a weird separation of identities and realities which I will return to in later chapters. But for now, as I have shown, it is dependent on a multi-dimensional arrangement of social heterogeneity in a fragile and delicate balance in order to achieve success. The fourth wall is the conceptual and visible idea of a wall which allows some distance to observe behaviour, a window to view unnoticed. It was adopted by the pioneering and film and television revolutions, and in production parlance of those examples, it has become known colloquially as crossing the line or the 180-degree rule. It is possible that one of the most fundamental physical and conceptual structures in all modern theatre, but it has also been a contentious side of contemporary theatre practice for most of the 20th century, particularly when director Bertolt Brecht began to challenge its assumed necessity. Brecht wants to point out the absurdities inherent to the fourth wall convention, that the audience who really believes they are watching a series of intimate exchanges should wait until they have left the theatre to applaud. As the philosopher points out, if the worker demands a realistic play, the reality of the audience sitting in a theatre and the actor's awareness of the audience's presence should be realistic representation by the theatrical presentation. We can see here how the fourth wall question becomes for Brecht not only an issue connected to the audience's experience to the action on the stage, but also to the more fundamental ontological struggle between the fantasy of the stage and the reality of the lived experience. The fourth wall not only blunts the critical attentions of the audience, but also obstructs the drawing of connections between the plot of the play and the events in the real world. This position formed a schism that would reverberate throughout anthropology and performance studies throughout the 60s and beyond. Rio and Bertelsen recount the history of this tension in Anthropology in 1968-1999, wherein they unpack a significant moment in the theoretical debate about performance in anthropology. At the heart of such an innocuous concept of the fourth wall is the liminal or liminoid stage of Turner's work on performance, the essence between the two positions being that the social theatre is ritualistic, and by defining a fourth wall in an aesthetic theatre, the transformative experience is not achieved. What was at stake in this debate is the transformative power of performance on the audience. Practitioners such as Artaud, Grotowski, Schechner, Barber, Brooke and so on all pursued an enlightened transformation of the audience via the social ritual nature of performance, as explained by Turner himself. However, Turner rejects this approach as potentially totalitarian because the creators of the performance maintain power over the audience. They are the ones who construct the experience and the social ritual through which the audience must go in order to become the new man at the end. They are the ones who determine the success or failure of the audience's transformation. They are the ones within whom the audience must place an enormous amount of trust to be reborn from the performers. And to do this meant a disassembling of the fourth wall, removing the imaginary safety barrier that kept at bay the spiritual opportunity of rebirth through performance and maintained illusionary frivolity. Artaud's work was the theatre of cruelty. It is perhaps no wonder that audiences would prefer a degree of safety behind the imaginary barrier of the fourth wall, where they can comfortably indulge in a suspended disbelief rather than give over to a bacchanalian consumption desired by Artaud. However, it has had some long-term impact, if not somewhat diluted in its nature, and the convention has now become self-referential, reflexive and commonplace amongst theatre, television and film. The theatrical device of breaking the fourth wall, whereon the stage actors acknowledge the presence of the audience, has become seen as a characteristic technique of modernist theatre. But the idea of breaking the fourth wall is still a meta-theatre convention because it is above and beyond, extra to and in context of the regular convention of the fourth wall. And it is still bound by the fourth wall anyway, despite any feelings of intimacy that breaking this suspended disbelief creates in an audience. The reality is that it works only in opposition to the convention. It is not necessarily a new phenomenon. Shakespeare is famous for his monologues. However, despite the variant applications, there is no opportunity to respond for the audience, and therefore a true communitas remains elusive. They are still watching at this moment from the other side, separated by time, space, production, film, processes, or the assumed behavioural manners with which were so obviously transgressed against the article above. In this sense, Turner is correct in his suspicions of totalitarian experience because the audience has an illusion of autonomy and yet is subject to the predetermined experiences by others. And in this sense, he advocated for liminal experiences, contained within certain secular experiences enjoyed in the breaks from real society in the theatre, when attending a church or when reading a novel. The last point is a direct echo of Bacon's argument for heteroglossia and its variants. I would add that I see the liminoid as an advance in the history of human freedom. For this reason, I relish the separation of an audience from performers and the liberation of scripts from cosmology and theology. The concept of individuality has been hard won, and to surrender it to a totalising process of reliminization is the dejecting thought. Liminoid theatre should present alternatives. It should not be a brainwashing technique. We're getting there. It is conceivable that Bacon's heteroglossia breaks down into carnival because of this theatrical convention of the fourth wall that somehow creates a barrier between luminoid and liminal theatre, and thus disrupts the hegemony of heteroglossia in literature. I love writing big PhD sentences. It makes me feel intelligent. Just like looking at the wrong camera. Then the fourth wall adds the complexity of even more layers of discourse to that conversation, such as various production departments of a theatre company with their unique and genre-specific heteroglossian linguistic descriptions, despite the seemingly endless configurations and complex interplay between form, function and aesthetics that exists. Examples of theatre performance each share a fundamental consistency in that the event itself is a social act. In this definition, the social act is the cumulative experience at a singular place and time where a synergy of these different hegemonies of creative work coalesce into a unit of experience between people. And this also happens within the context of wider Lost my place. And this also happens within the context of wider social norms, including class systems, seasons of the year, marketing, demographics, and even political culture. The social act itself is the event, and thus Batkin's carnival behaviours are indicative of the theatrical performance. If not over and above, then at least in harmony with the artistic reflection that is the play itself. Approaching analysis or efficacy of theatre in a web-based universe therefore becomes problematic because web-based and tech-based mediation or delivery of the experience is by definition a dislocated social act, which with participants separated by space and time, even though these are shared. In order to consider a new way of considering such a dislocated social act and its impact on making dramatic narrative online, it is worth considering additional ways of thinking. Media theory, and particularly social media analysis, provides some tools with which to consider a way forward. Lash, for example, determines a new matrix for understanding construction and consumption of online social life. He argues that cultural acts or works of art are the product of deep reflexive contemplation, experienced in social acts and then digested through broader cultural narratives. This is akin to the definition of carnival, a collective social act where an audience of participants and agency is a collective, if not contested, milieu. However, citing Scott, he adds new media are comprised of three main elements: content, code, and communications. And using these criteria, it can be seen that cultural events are no longer assessed by the complexity of these slow-moving vessels of human activity, but by the flow or volume of communication generated about the content, thereby recalibrating the metrics of cultural experience. As Lash describes it, there is a new metric for measuring the impact of an online event. The metric is based on the flow of communication, and based on the volume of that flow, there is an exchange value associated with it. This is self-evident in many ways when you consider pop culture and online influencers commanding huge incomes from access to their communication volume through collaborations and endorsements. Yes?
Our water is getting shut off, so we have 9 bottles filled up.
Good work, honey. Well done. Thank you. This can also be backed up by the emerging research around how this happens, including blah blah blah, as well as the creative projects by artists that are trying to tap into the same constellation of influences. Each of these speak of the integrated network of conscious and unconscious relationships of content, code and communication that exists often within an actor network theory analysis. One conclusion of this is that cultural value exists in a rapid and short-lived competition for attention on a platform of immediacy. Although I would argue that there is also a history of cultural comments that combine, like any other social web of significance, to form knowledge, gatekeepers and power unique to it. These exist and operate reflective of real life social rules and etiquette, but they also exist within what Bowden calls culture at a distance. Using these two examples of dislocated time, space and place and communication flow as a signifier of meaning, it is easy to see how there is a structural change from performance as has been known and based on opposite characteristics. This structural change can be understood if we rearrange the abstract conceptions of performance as one of layers rather than pens. I use the word pens as reflective of the holding stations of livestock moving around a yard. The analogy of people, livestock, corralled in designated spaces, theatres, and performing roles prescriptive of them, does not hold in a web environment wherein absent bodies inhabit and share space with almost free movement. In this absence of body yet presence of consciousness, it is this absence of body yet presence of consciousness in an abstract place online that creates a fourth dimension of performance in an online social gathering. The absent bodies inhabit the space via a personalised layer of technology. For example, one participant may be accessing via an Android mobile device at a local coffee shop, while another sits at an Apple Mac desktop in their home office. Examples of not only different types of devices, but different operating systems, codes and internet access. 4G mobile phone network in the case of a phone, or Wi-Fi in the case of a home computer. Each individual appears in the abstract location online via the distinctive layers of operating system codes and other technologies they use to enable them. In terms of Batkin structuralism, each is subject to an ordered hierarchy of language through which they construct a reality from their guided imagination. Yet each are different, and yet imagination. Yet each are different, and neither impact on Yet each are different, and neither impact on the experience of the event. Each are different, independent. Independent of each. Independent, and neither impact on the experience of the event. Likewise, the creators of the content that these participants have come to engage in are also accessing the web space using these same interfaces of technology, such as creating avatars. However, they are also engaged in some of the more fundamental and familiar aspects of experience control for the conventional theatre maker, determining what characters speak and when, what they say and how the story is told using vision and sound. There are limitations on other physical senses of the traditional theatre, such as smell and light, specifically stage lighting. However, they are replaced, if not replicated, with opportunities for editing and special effects layered over the live broadcast. And so there are multiple layers of interactivity determined by multiple layers of hardware and software. The flow of communication that Lash describes as the new metric of meaning in this space can be seen in even this limited example, but is also framed by a series of layers which exist only in the lived experience of being online. Avatars, profile pictures, profile biographies, and connected email addresses can all create the identity of a participant, which may be a fabricated one from the real-life person typing the information. Finally, the efficacy of the online event is determined by feedback from participants back through these layers to their consciousness. Traffic flows measured by sites such as Google Analytics. And as Lash claims, the veracity of this flow back and forth, the volume and engagement reflective of the participants engaged, determines the success of the experience. In an early fieldwork encounter that highlights this, I came across a live stream interview by a popular singer my daughter regularly watches on YouTube. The stream opened with an empty chair and the classic interview position on camera, hints of filming equipment in shot and a faux domestic scene behind as if to make the star appear every day and caught in a backstage domestic space instead of the familiar concert or paparazzi event my girls were used to. By the time we had tuned in, there were several thousand people there with us from around the world, obviously doing something similar to us. The empty chair held shop for rather a long time until a conversation off camera could be heard between the singer and her management. The celebrity could be heard to ask how many people were online waiting for her. When she was told the figure, she could be heard firing back, "I'm not going on until I've at least doubled that." Rather than setting off a stream of disappointment and abuse from disgruntled fans, they mobilised individually and en masse, each contacting their friends and sharing the event on their own social media networks, encouraging more and more people to join live streams so the numbers could be reached, and their heroine came online to talk with them. The energy and traffic resulted in a surge of activity, and the online viewers quickly reached their target and beyond within a few minutes. This early fieldwork encounter and other similar ones highlight the triptych to which Lash refers: code, communication and content. But more than that, it is an example of how a shepherded experience online creates a meaningful event for thousands of people dislocated by time, place and space, yet sharing the consciousness of an event experience. Layers of experience which collectively create meaning. Layers of experience being the form of the interactions at your desk, on your phone, in a booth or at a public house or bar. Then there is the layer of the platform you're engaging with, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and so on. And finally, there is the layer of your identity. Most people in most encounters would think they are authentic and identify themselves as such. But there are alternate identities: business, social, political, familial. In some cases, for example, those described by I've Got to Find That article, these are compartmentalised backstage identities of an individual, to borrow a term. Profiles which can speak about aspects of one's life through the mask of social media account that cannot be expressed casually IRL. These layers of different appearances form a total meaning for the person engaged in the act, both as an individual and an individual in the collective cultural experience. In this respect, there is a relationship that is tangible between audience and performance that I can relate to. Steer me through what would become a deeply personal experience in the field, one which challenged embedded cultural and professional perspectives about how live theatre works, and which in some ways could only ever be understood with the disruption of the web and live streaming. As an example of how, even at a rudimentary level, we can see the manifestation of Lash's claims, below are screen-captured images of the broadcast software used in the field. The first image identifies the matrix of inputs the broadcaster is presented with using the software program Wirecast. The bottom half shows 5 channels, each of which can contain multiple inputs, ranging from cameras and microphones to media files, audio tracks, remote websites and more. The topmost channel sits atop the others and can be reordered somewhat like pictures inserted into a Word document such as this one. With the use of green screen technology, filters and resizing particular frames, the broadcaster can build up layers of input. You can see these layers of input here. There's a layer of me here. Yes, there is the layer of the background image. Would you like to? Broadcast shot is shown in the top left-hand frame. Beneath is an arrow button which can then activate and access the shot live and is seen on the right-hand frame. Thus the broadcaster or producer can assemble a shot based on information, interest and any other important factor in preparation to be seen by the public and underneath the emotional frames. Any cursory reading feeling, for example, highlights these structures of frames that they cannot see beyond, and someone in the body can get an social act, similar social experience. It is inherent in the language of the mind that connects all soon lost. Without the new dimension of Web 2, life things are conscious of abstract space and places the likes of atomic chips and the search of things they aspire to create and can never be achieved. Empathy with a character or story. Theatre has many invocations from pantomimes to musicals and ethnodramas. All of them would aspire to transport the audience to an abstract place of imagination in order to create belief. Then, many as a theatre maker can try if they are looking at many features of this